As you can see on this slide, we have a collaborative note-taking document open. I'm posting the link right now. 100 contributors can work in this doc at the same time. So if you want to help us out with note-taking, then you have to be quick. And otherwise, you can just enjoy without taking notes. We're doing this workshop in a webinar mode, which means you're joining us in a listen-only mode. You can use the chat or the Q&A function throughout the session to communicate with us or ask any questions. And we'll make sure to look through them and give them attention as needed. I'll take you through the agenda as well. Today in the workshop, we'll discuss a couple of tools that the FAIRsFAIR project has developed to help repositories increase their fair share. Before the break, we'll discuss the repository support program and the tools used in that. And after the break, we discuss two more assessment tools, FAIRsFAIR and Fuji. And you'll have the opportunity to have some hands-on experiences with these tools. Next slide, please. I'll give a short rundown of the FAIRsFAIR project. It's a European project with a main goal of supplying practical solutions for the use of the FAIR data principles throughout the entire research data lifecycle. So from data generation all the way through to long-term preservation and the reuse of data. The project has a budget of 10 million euros and a duration of 3 years, and it will end in February of next year. It has 22 different partners from 8 different European Union member states. And on the image on the right here, you can see an overview of the main outputs from the FAIRsFAIR project, which covers a broad scope. Next slide. As I said, in our workshop today, we'll discuss 2 different outputs from the FAIRsFAIR project, namely the repository support program and the 2 assessment tools, FAIRsFAIR and Fuji. And these both belong in the category of the certification outputs of the FAIRsFAIR project. Next slide. These tools have all been designed for different stakeholder groups, but that by no means means that they're exclusively useful for these stakeholders. And we hope to show you that during this workshop. So for example, the FAIRsFAIR tool is designed for researchers and data stewards. And the tools used in the repository support program are aimed at repository managers who hope to achieve their Core Trust Seal certification. And the Fuji tool has actually been developed to support both of these stakeholder groups. We will revisit this slide at the end of the workshop, and we hope that you'll have a more understanding about how each tool can support you in being more fair as a repository. And with that, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Olivier, who will tell you more about the FAIRsFAIR support program.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. So yeah, the FAIRsFAIR repository support program was intended to support repository managers, because when they want to demonstrate that they have implemented some quality assurance processes in order to make their data fair and trustworthy, they may want to go the journey to certification, and that, the Core Trust Seal was the certification that we targeted. Next slide, please. So the Core Trust Seal, just in case you're not aware, is a data repository certification, which was based on the Data Seal of Approval and WTS Core Trustworthy requirements. It's made of 16 requirements that you have to comply with, and it can be seen as a little bit difficult to achieve. That's the rationale for putting that support program together. What we wanted to do is to assist the repository manager along the journey towards certification and becoming trustworthy and fair enabling. So We had an open call in the middle of 2019. We had many repositories that applied for that support program. And out of these repositories, we selected 10 of them, and we provided support to them over that certification process. So next slide, please. The support team is made of partners to the FAIRsFAIR project. So you've got the list of the partners here: DANS, CNES in France, the UK Data Archive, DCC, and Panji in Germany. Next slide, please. And the 10 repositories that we selected are nicely spread across Europe. You've got a picture on the different countries in which they are settled. Now, the timeline for the support program. We started in early 2020 with a kickoff during which we tried to explain the core trust seal, the 16 criteria, and how to go to the certification. Later in 2020, the initial idea was to do some test self-assessment. So basically, the core trusted certification is based on the self-assessment that the repository managers will do on these 16 criteria. It will be then reviewed by experts, and ultimately you will be certified or not. So our idea was to do some test self-assessment with the repository so that they feel enough confident when they want to do the real application. So that's what we did in the middle of 2020. We had a couple of workshops in order to answer the different questions that were raised by the repository manager. And ultimately, we ended up in early 2021 with a final workshop and the repository managers being ready to officially apply. Next slide, please. So I think that out of the 10 repositories, 8 of them have now submitted their application to the core trust seal. It's now being reviewed by the core trust seal experts. In the meantime, we are still moving ahead with the support program. We've got additional stuff that we want to do, like a survey and a final workshop in order to be able to prepare our deliverables. You need to be aware that there were a budget available for those repositories in order to assist them for funding, for example, travel expenses, and funding also the application fee, because the cost you need to pay something like €1,000 in order to apply for the core trust seal. Next slide. So, as a summary, the support that we provided to the repositories consisted of 4 support workshops, the test reviews that we did, also one-to-one meetings that we had when required, and practical tools as well. Next slide. In addition to those workshops and one-to-ones, we also did a survey in order to try to identify the main issues or concern for those repositories. You can see the results on the screen. The biggest one was, and it's not a big surprise, was the fact that in order to go through the certification process, you need to provide evidences and documentation of the quality processes that you have implemented. And sometimes it's a bit difficult to have all this documentation ready. And also, the second biggest concern was around the long-term preservation strategy. Because for fairness, for the FAIR principles, generally a snapshot, your FAIR, the long-term preservation introduce a time scale that's not available in the principles, and that was an area of concern for the repositories, and we tried to address this with a dedicated workshop that we had on the subject. Next slide. So this is now time for the two repositories who have accepted to provide their feedback on the process. We will start with Peter and the Apollo repository. So Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Olivier. My name is Peter Sutton-Long. I'm the repository manager at the University of Cambridge. So I help to manage the Apollo repository, which is the sole institutional repository at Cambridge. It's managed by two divisions of Cambridge University Library, the Office of Scholarly Communication and the Open Research Services division, of which I'm part of. So Apollo is central to the university's ambitions to make all Cambridge research openly available. So it's a very well-used repository with around 250,000 research outputs as of a couple of days ago. And we tend to average about 2 million item downloads each year. Next slide, please. So over the last few years, the university has made two major kind of policy statements in support of open research working, and both of which draw on the FAIR principles. So we were looking at a way to make it clear that the Apollo repository supported those two policies. We looked at different kind of certifications, and we ended up with Core Trust Seal because we felt we have no experience in certification or standardization. And we felt that Core Trust Seal was something attainable within our kind of level of expertise. But to make no mistake, it's a rigorous process. It's not a kind of a beginner certification by any means, but we felt it was one that we could certainly attain. We also were fortunate that we had a request from the archaeological department at Cambridge. They had started a couple of academic projects with local authority partners. And those partners, one of the stipulations in the research funding was that the research outputs, so the primary outputs and supporting evidence, the data, should be deposited in a repository that has Core Trust Seal certification. So that gave us a kind of green light to proceed. We'd obviously articulated to the university why we wanted to do it. And while it's obviously doing something better is always good, it can be sort of abstract, especially when you're trying to demonstrate the value in terms of the resources and time that you're putting into actually certification. But having an actual concrete request from a research partner meant that we were far more confident in proceeding. Next slide, please. So we were fortunate, as Olivier said, to be accepted onto the FAIRsFAIR support program. I think it's fair to say without that program, we might still perhaps be in the throes of doing our application right now, because if you ever looked at the kind of Core Trust Seal requirements when you first open them, it's still a bit daunting. So self-evaluation, though, it's become obvious to us during the process that it's been incredibly valuable. So we are confident that we are now in a far greater position than we were before to demonstrate our kind of credentials. We're far more confident that we can say to research partners, yes, we have a high quality repository. Well, I should say we haven't actually received certification yet, so I don't want to jump the gun too much. I think we found it very useful to engage key stakeholders early. So you are having to kind of devote time and resources to doing certification. It's really important that you get support from your kind of superiors, not just directly, but within the kind of greater organization. And the one thing that will determine the amount of kind of time that you take to actually certify, which is the kind of calendar time, not just your personal time, is your kind of policy landscape and how accessible the kind of supporting evidence you need to provide to your certification is. I think your repository context is the very first thing you have to fill in. And I think initially we felt it was just a kind of entry-level introduction, but understanding the context of your repository and providing a good articulation of the designated community that actually use your repository is really important. We read widely on kind of the previous applications, and we found there are very few from kind of general purpose repositories. So we struggle with them because effectively for university, your designated community, people that use your repository is potentially all the researchers at your university, plus everyone else in the world that might read the research at some point. So this is like an area that needs to given some kind of greater kind of like look at this kind of first. But I think, as a result of the certification process, we're far more confident now that we can kind of go forward and support the university's ambitions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this very valuable feedback. We have also Rudolf Dimper from ESRF with us. So, Rudolf, over to you for.
Hello, hello to everybody, and thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you to Maaike and Olivier. So I am working at the ESRF. This is this place you see on the left-hand side, which is the European Synchrotron Radiation Facility, one of the 8 international research facilities in Europe. We are a service laboratory, so we have loads of visitors coming in with the samples, examining what the samples are constituted of, understanding how the matter is organized, and this generates petabytes of data every year, and this data goes into our research data archive, and this is what we would like to get certified. Now, next slide, please. The certifying is one thing, but of course there is a lot of preparatory work which I would like simply to mention. First of all, we had to get in place a data policy which defines how we collect the data and preserve it, how we define the embargo period during which the scientists have exclusive right on the data before it becomes open. It is clear that research facilities now in Europe produce more and more data, and this data is more and more complex. So it's very important that the research infrastructures take care of the professional data management. And this also links to the fact that scientists now need to be in a position to be able to link their publication to the data. So trust for this is essential. Reproducibility and reuse is also extremely important. And last but not least, of course, we contribute actively in the putting into place of the European Open Science Cloud, which interconnects all these services in Europe. Next slide, please. Now, the key lessons from our FAIR journey is that you need to prepare everything very carefully to be able, first of all, to put your data repository into a position which is really certifiable. Therefore, for the data repository, you need to get all the management and the in-house scientists on board. You need to ensure that the data policy is part of the governance, and that the research infrastructure has dedicated human resources to work on implementing the data repository. So FAIR data management is something which is extremely complicated to put in place for us, at least, because we are very dynamic in terms of data formats, in terms of metadata collection. So the human resources required for this are not to be underestimated. And we have always been very fortunate that we got support from Europe, from the Commission, to have projects which allowed us to prepare all this over the last 10 years. In fact, not only since we have the data policy in place, but it actually, the activity started already 10 years ago. At that time, nobody was talking about FAIR, about EOSC. That was still before, and we already started that, and we are still actively pursuing how to make this more professional. Next slide, please. So it's so FAIR data management is now becoming a company culture, and of course this requires that we have everybody on board, that we train our staff, that everybody understands what is involved by making data fair, that the standards are applied, and not only in one research infrastructure, but also the similar ones in the European landscape. And that, of course, is always a difficult one. One has to communicate and share best practices with the whole community. You have to understand that the photon and neutron research infrastructures are in an ensemble of about 20 research infrastructures in Europe, which now apply similar data policies and approach FAIR data management in the same way. And obviously the ultimate gain here, or aim, is open science, but let's not go too much into this, there's no time. Next slide, please. Just to finish off, so the certification process was very interesting. It was very important that we had the support from FAIRsFAIR. We were extremely grateful for this, because the interaction allowed us to actually make everything understandable, fill in the gaps, make the thing at the right length, explain, have the right narrative for the before entering into the real certification. So we learned a lot. We understand now where we are weak. So that's also very important for the future. And I think we are in a good spot now for the certification process itself, knowing very well that we still have a substantial amount of work in front of us. And let me just take this opportunity once again to thank really FAIRsFAIR for all the support, which was really fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rudolf. So I can carry on with the biggest challenges that we identified as the support program managers. First, we only had 2 years as a timeline for this. So planning appeared really to be key. We needed to have everyone available when appropriate for the repository to put together the self-assessments, for the reviewers to review them, and the target being to have the application done, let's say 6 months before the end of the support program, really. Another thing that appear to be very important is the ability to tailor our support, because the level of readiness for the certification application was different among the different repositories. So we had to tailor the support program by organizing one-to-ones and by doing some specific actions for the repositories. And the ultimate challenge that we had, remember that our objective was to have the 10 repositories applying for the core trust seal. I think that we are close to that number, because as far as I'm aware, I think that 8 repositories have already applied for the core trust seal. So yeah, we are quite close to the initial objective. So that was the challenges we had. So I'm now giving the floor to Patricia for the discussion, I think.
Yep, thank you, Olivier, and our guest speakers. There should be an opportunity also to ask questions in this slot. I don't see any in the question and answer box yet, but if you want to take the opportunity to type some questions in there, we will pick them up at the end of the discussion before we go into a short break. The discussion will cover a little bit of getting to know you in the audience, and then I'll talk you through some more of the tools that we've used or created to support the repositories. And we do have a bit of an open space where you can put forward any other ideas and things that you would like to see. Because we're a rather big group, you're probably used to these by now after several months of online conferences. We'd like to do this on Mentimeter. So if I could ask those of you who want to take part in this to go to menti.com and enter the code that Maaike kindly has also put in the chat. So you can just copy that, and I'll switch over, and we're kicking off by just getting a bit of a feeling for where in the world you're based right now. We've got folks in Canada, welcome. Thank you for getting up early. Australia, I guess that is staying up late, and a nice spread across mainly Europe, but also colleagues in South Africa. It's nice. Admire, the folk in the US and Canada that got up early for this. I'm myself not a morning person, so thank you for being here with us. Got about 50 of you, 54, 55 taking part in this. And I think we've got about 90 people, just about 100 on the call. So not everyone might want to be actively taking part here, but maybe we can hit the 60 and then I move us on to the next slide. There we go. It's a good split and got a good coverage across Europe and with a few other countries. Like Singapore and Taiwan, that area has popped up. So that is really a good spread across the globe now. Wonderful to see. Thank you. So now that we know where you're based, we kind of are interested what your role is with regards to repositories. If all of you are repository managers, or if you have like other roles as well. We do have data stewards. We do have some senior managers. Oh, research software engineers, interesting. Nice that they now find their way into the repository community. I've not given you an option to tell me what other is, so that was not super smart, but if you want to put that either in the chat or in our shared note-taking document, if you feel that you have like a standout role, that would be good as well. And we have like about the same number of active people that we had for the intro slide. So I think that means we can move on, but a good number of repository managers and data librarians. So I hope this is useful to you. So you've seen some of this on the slides already. So what we've basically created to get the repository that we supported started are a few tools and exercises that they could use. And we started with a road mapping exercise at the at our kickoff workshop back when you could actually still do face-to-face things. And that was really getting an idea of the activities and tasks like writing up your documentation and other things that you as a repository need to get started and working on your way to Core Trust Seal certification, and also highlighting a few risks on the way that might mean you might be delayed in that. So that really like was an initial thinking exercise to help the repositories plan and align with the support that we provided them. And that exercise is available on Zenodo if you're interested in doing that yourself with your repository. And that gets me to the next question, which is just like, how likely are you going to use this if you're starting or looking at repository certification in your institution? And so far, folks are likely neutral or on the likely end, a few unlikely ones. I guess if your repository is not really in scope for certification, then that's a fair point to make. Although even if you're certified already, if recertification comes up, so I don't know if we've mentioned that already, but Core Trust Seal certification is good for a 3-year period, and then you basically need to go through the process again. So even if you're certified once, there's always room to improve and pick this up again. But it looks like people are neutral, might give it a look, don't know, but we have a few that will give this a look. So that's quite interesting. Together with the roadmap, we've created a little mind map to get all your stakeholders on board. We've heard from some of our repositories already that actually, there are quite a few people that you want to get involved in the process to make sure you have buy-in. There are some Core Trust Seal requirements that ask for information about areas where you don't have necessarily all the knowledge in, so you will need to get their input. Basically alongside with the roadmap, when you've identified which bits you need, we've also created this mind map to help identify the people in your institution that you need to go off and find and talk to make sure you can move this forward. So if you don't have anything like that already, again, how likely are you going to use this potentially alongside the road mapping exercise, or maybe also for some different exercises or assessments that you're going through. Again, this looks very similar to the road mapping piece, which I guess makes sense as they are kind of part of the same package of exercise. No one tells us that it's very unlikely that they use it, so I guess that's a good sign that there's some use to these exercises, even if you don't necessarily have an immediate, or some of you don't have an immediate need for them. So thank you for that. And basically around these tools that we created, some time for you to think, and from what you've seen and heard from the repositories, what do you think is missing? What have we not covered yet, and what would make this a bit more useful to you? I know that might be like difficult to assess now, seeing as you didn't have that much time to look into it. But if there are immediate things that you can think of, please let us know now. A tool like the FAIRsFAIR validator. I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure what the FAIRsFAIR validator does, but that might be actually closer to some of the tools that Maaike will introduce to you in the second section of this workshop. Peer comparison, yes, that's a good one, and I guess that's the advantage that you know, the community of the supported repository had, that they actually had a bit of a comparison to other repositories and how they are doing, and a place to engage and exchange. How do I know if my repository is a candidate for certification? There is something that might help with that we'll point out in the Outlook. So there's a paper that we have worked on that might help with that if you're in scope for at least Core Trust Seal certification. Checklists of steps to complete and help assess if you could do this. Yeah, I think that's again something that we would like to produce at the end of this based on some more surveys and interviews with our repositories to understand where they spent the money that they got as part of the support program, to understand where you might want to spend more resources. So good points. One pages are always good. Another exercise that we've done is a preservation policy planning worksheet, as Olivier has highlighted. Like documentation was one of the big issues, and especially in the area for outlining the preservation activities that you're doing. So what does a good preservation policy look like? What does it need to cover? Were some of the questions that some of the repositories weren't entirely sure about, especially if that's an area where you need to write your documentation from scratch. It's good to have like a bit of a guide and a document that helps you planning. So we did created a worksheet that is based on work from the Digital Preservation Coalition that we brought a little bit more into the specific repository context that we were working with, and asked our repositories to go through that to see how well their policy is already laid out in the preservation aspect of things, and where they might have gaps and bits that they might want to fill. And again, do you think this is something you're likely to use? Not necessarily in, specific for certification, but just as an area that you want to look at with your repository. Again, few that are feeling that this is something they would give a look, which is, I guess, quite good feedback that we've created some tools that are useful beyond the community of our repositories that we've worked with so far. So that's quite good. And again, if you have immediate feedback on what that would make that more useful specifically, then please let us know now. And if you have more general feedback, there will be another open question after this where you can let us know while you type. What came in the question Q&A were again a question about the Open Air Fair validator. Thank you, Irina, for answering that. Seeing as she's involved in open air and we're not, so there's a recording available for those who want to know more about that. Policies, examples, and templates. So yeah, we provided those in our workshop, and the slides for that are available as well. So they are there for you to check out. So that's that actually is there, but maybe we need to highlight that more. So that's good to know. And now for the open question, what other support would be useful for you to become more trustworthy and FAIR enabling as a repository that you're working with or for? And again, that can be based on some of the things that you've heard already, where you would just like to know more about what we've done, or fresh ideas that FAIRsFAIR could pick up in the time that we have, which is a few more months, to see if we can create resources or anything else that could be helpful to you. Irina is kindly pointing out the overlapping partners between Open Air and FAIRsFAIR for the dashboard for the validator. So I guess we should look at maybe can create a little bit of a resource to highlight how they relate. A beginner's guide for those that are just starting. Yeah, that's good. Online training is available as well as part of FAIRsFAIR. We're running a lot of data stewardship schools that are suitable for most that want to learn more, and we're working on getting the what's it called, a FAIR handbook ready to highlight how universities can support FAIR training and include that in curricula, individual or group meetings. So I guess that's exactly the bit that you usually are not getting when you're looking at the material out there that is exclusive or was fairly exclusive to the support program with this one-to-one support. But yeah, also mentoring programs are a good idea. So that is actually quite interesting that this one-to-one support is something that would make it easier. So if not for FAIRsFAIR, then maybe that's an interesting one for Quartz Seal to pick up directly, so we can pass that on. Some more guidance on certain aspects of FAIR. Yeah, there's plenty in the works, and we'll make sure we highlight that. But I think I'm at the end of the time that we had allocated to this discussion. I'll keep this open, so if you have more suggestions, you can put them in and they will be read and picked up by us and followed up. But other than that, I think it's now time for a little break. And we see you in not exactly 10 minutes because I went 2 minutes over time, but in 8 minutes at 25 past whatever hour it is currently in the area that you are in, for the second part of this workshop where we look a bit in more detail at some of the other tools that we have created. So thank you for your input and activity and engagement up to now, and see you in a few minutes.
Continue on. I'll continue on by introducing 2 more tools created by the FAIRsFAIR project, namely FAIRware and Fuji. They are very complementary in the sense that they sit on opposite ends of the spectrum, where FAIRware is most useful before data publication and Fuji is most useful after data publication. In a very short summary, FAIRware answers the question, how can you make new data more fair, which is aimed at researchers and data stewards, and Fuji answers the question, how fair are existing data in repositories, which is mostly aimed at data repositories. Next slide, please. So, FAIRware is an online self-assessment tool with the main goal of increasing the awareness and understanding of the FAIR data principles and how you can make data fair. It is aimed at researchers and data stewards, and it consists of 10 short questions supplemented with extensive guidance texts and additional resources aimed to increase the knowledge and understanding of how you can make a data set the most fair it can be. Next slide, please. So you can use the tool and the resources presented there to increase your knowledge and develop FAIR skills. Because the tool is still in development, we also have some feedback questions added at the bottom in which you can share your experience and how we can make the tool more user-friendly and more informative. After you submit, you will receive an overview of how aware and how much willingness to comply you've indicated and how you can improve it even more. And then all that's left to do is, of course, spread the word. Next slide, please. The other tool is the Fuji tool, which is an automated FAIR data assessment tool. It was originally created to be machine actionable, as you can see on the left-hand side. But we've also developed a graphical user interface recently to be more human-friendly. The Fuji tool is based on 16 of the FAIR data metrics and will run these metrics and different tests associated with it on a data set or a combination of data sets, and will produce a fairness score, also accompanied with more improvement tips on how to become more fair. So the machine actionable version of this tool is very useful for data repositories because they can use it on their entire archive and see how fair they are and where they can improve. And the graphical user interface is very useful for individual researchers or people who are simply curious about the Fuji tool, because it really shows in a human-friendly way which tests are done and what kind of output you will receive. Next slide, please. So the rundown of the Fuji tool is very simple, especially the graphical user interface. You provide a persistent identifier of the data set. The Fuji runs its tests, and then you can look through the results, which can look something like the image here, on why you didn't or did pass the several tests run by Fuji. Next slide. Fuji is also still in development, just as the FAIRware tool, and this is done by a continuous iteration of development. We have several pilot repositories who pilot the tool for us, and they get the benefit of the feedback from the Fuji assessment, and we have the benefit of the feedback on their user experience and what they think of the tool. Next slide, please. So I've done a really short and brief job of describing these two tools to give you the most amount of time to take a look at them for yourselves. So you have, let's see, about 15 minutes to take a look at these tools yourself, which isn't really enough to do a very thorough job of both of the tools, but you can either take a look at one of them very thoroughly or both of them a little bit more globally. For the Fuji tool, you need a data set, which we will provide in the chat, or you can choose one of your own. And the FAIR aware test is also best answered with a data set in mind, but you don't need the actual URL of it. An example of how you can do both at the same time is open Fuji first, enter the PID from the data set, let Fuji run, and while it's running, take a look at the FAIR aware tool. And then you have some time at the end to take a look at the results from the Fuji tool. So I'll give you some 15 minutes to do this. Throughout, you can feel free to use the chat and the Q&A function to tell us about your experiences or have any questions, you can let us know. And then at the end, I will open the Zoom poll for a couple of experience questions for you. Yes. The example data sets have been posted in the chat, as well as the links to FAIR aware in Fuji. So let us know what you think and take a look. I see a comment coming in on the Australian ARCDC tool on FAIR, which is also a very nice tool to assess the fairness of your data and is something that the FAIRware tool is based on partly. And a reminder, you can also use the collaborative note-taking document to write down any of your thoughts and experience. You still have some 5 minutes to continue browsing through the tools, but I might ask Irina if we can already launch the poll now, so you can answer the experience questions already if you'd like. So you have time to answer them before we discuss. I'm not sure though if that pop-up will be annoying if you're trying to work with the tools still, or if you can work around it.
Shall I launch it?
Yes,
You
we
say?
will see.
Okay, just a sec.
So these are just 3 short questions about your initial opinion of the tool. If you have any more extensive feedback or experience to share with us, you can either put it in the FAIRsFAIR feedback form or let us know right now in the chat or the collaborative note-taking document.
And if a pop-up window is annoying, I think you can move it on your screen a bit.
Great, I see some answers coming in. I'm going to leave it open for a little while longer. If you have any other questions about the repository support program or for our repository speakers, Rudolf or Peter, you can also still post them in the Q&A section or the chat. We have a little bit of time left now to discuss those questions if you didn't think of them in time earlier. And if you feel like you want to explain the answer you gave in the poll, you can also do so in the chat. So I hope this time has given you the opportunity to at least globally become aware of these 2 tools and what they can do for you. Because as I said before, even though these tools are designed for specific stakeholders, virtually anyone who is dealing with data in their day-to-day life can use these tools to become more aware of the FAIR principles and how to apply them in data. I'll keep the poll open for a little bit longer. Let's see if we can hit the 50% mark. That would be nice, good overview. And then I'll give you over to Patricia for the wrap up. an outlook on other things that the FAIRsFAIR project also offers, and resources you might want to take a look at after this workshop.
We're still at 46% mark, so please give us four more percent.
Yeah. Please answer the questions if you haven't already. Almost there. Yes, we reached the halfway mark. Great. Thank you all for answering the poll questions.
Shall I end it?
Yeah, we shall close it so we can take a look at the results together. I believe they're posted then for everyone to see. So in general, the FAIRsFAIR tool is rated a 4 out of 5 stars in usefulness for supporting researchers and data stewards in making their data fair, which is really good to hear because it's the main aim of the tool. So we're doing something well, I suppose. And the next question, the results of the Fuji tests are clear to me. It's mostly neutral, and the next best thing is agree. So we're somewhere around the middle with that. I would love to hear some elaboration on these answers. Why is the result clear to you, or why isn't it? And we can respond to those in the chat and take it aboard as feedback, of course. And the last question, I can use FAIRsFAIR and or Fuji in my own training, which mostly agree, which is also great to hear because I think both tools have value for each individual, even if they're not aimed at repository managers specifically always. I think they're always good, especially since making data fair is a tight collaboration between researchers and the repository. I think FAIRsFAIR also has some benefits for the repository managers to know what's out there in guiding the researchers on their way to FAIR and how they make their choice regarding which repository they will deposit their data in. So it's very informative. Thank you so much for your answers. And I'll hand you over to Patricia for the wrap up.
Yeah, and I needed to find the unmute button because I was answering in the chat. So it's like trying to do too many things at the same time. Thank you, Maaike, for that deep dive into FAIRsFAIR and Fuji. And thanks to everyone who's providing feedback in the chat. That is a really interesting discussion. You can still post questions. We'll pick them up at the end before we close. But I'll provide a bit of an outlook of what else is coming from FAIRsFAIR that might be of interest or relevance to you, and then we wrap this up. So what we've done in this session in detail is looked at a variety of the tools that we've created as part of the repository support program for repositories to use that can help to assess the fairness of the data sets you hold and work towards Quotrust seal certification if that's something you're interested in. Some of the other things that FAIRsFAIR is working on is we're working with a DataCite on their repository finder. So that is basically a filter on top of re3 data, their registry to search for data repositories. And that filters re3 data for repositories that meet criteria for FAIRsFAIR, which means like the repository provides open access data, uses persistent identifiers, and is certified. And at the moment, that results in about 110 repositories that would meet these criteria. Going forward, DataCite is reworking this, and together with re3 Data, they're actually working on the underlying metadata schema they use to catalog data repositories, and they're going to integrate it into DataCite Commons. For those who are already regular users of DataCite Commons, it's basically the search engine for everything like DataCite provides, which means you can find works that have a DOI. You can search for people by using ORCIDs, and organizations using raw identifiers. And in the future, by the end of FAIRsFAIR, you also have like an option to search specifically for repositories, where then re3 Data will be integrated. And then again, the FAIRsFAIR filter will become a facet then there that will let you search. But you can already use that at the moment in the current place it's in. And if your repository is not yet in re3 Data, you should definitely get it in there, get an entry. We're also looking at bringing Core Seal together with the FAIR principles. So at the moment, FAIR is not mentioned in any of the Core Seal requirements, but they kind of align quite nicely with the FAIR principles in theory. And we're also working at a capability maturity model that helps towards this FAIR certification of repositories, where we're looking at various entities and how mature repositories are in addressing these. Core Seal at the moment has like also some kind of self-assessment, but it's not really looking at capability or maturity in that way. And we're also putting that forward as a recommendation for the next version of Core Seal to actually cover FAIR in a bit more detail there. So there's a new publication around that coming up soon this summer, if that's something you're interested in, and some of the initial thinking is already out there on Zenodo. We've also just published a common discussion paper together with EOSC Nordic and Shock called FAIR plus Time, and that looks at two of the aspects of Core Seal in a bit more detail. It discusses the key concepts designated community and preservation, which came up quite a bit already today. And it looks at some of the standards and assessments that are required to create an interoperable ecosystem where FAIR data is preserved for the long term. And that is actually one of these bits of additional guidance that you can read, and that should help you clarify if your organization is a candidate for Core Seal, or if in those two key concepts for Core Seal, you might need to put in more work before that is something that you would get certified for successfully. We're also running a repository support webinar series with monthly sessions. Some of the planned upcoming topics are looking at using registries to make repository service more visible. So that's a deep dive into re3 Data and the DataCite repository finder. We're also doing a bit of a more in-depth look at the preservation planning worksheet that I've introduced. And whenever there's anything else relevant that we're that's coming out of the repository support from FAIRsFAIR. We'll do a little session on that as well. So if you're interested in those on the FAIRsFAIR webpage, you can basically sign up to become notified for the next dates, if this is something you're interested in, and recordings from the ones in the past are already available there if you want to catch up with anything. And yeah, just some highlighting the other things you can do, you know, spread the word, like invite other repositories to give the tools a look. It's also always good if repositories talk about what they're doing specifically to support FAIR practices widely, and if FAIRsFAIR tools have helped with that, we would be very happy to get a shout out. I'd also like to highlight the FAIR Data Forum that the FAIRsFAIR project is running and has created, where you find a place for a bit more informal networking support, where you can ask questions that you have around trustworthy digital repositories or any of the other topics around FAIR and all the other work that FAIRsFAIR is doing. So we're basically populating all that. And with that, I think it's up to me to say thank you for all of you for attending and for spending the last 90 minutes with us. Thank you very much to my FAIRsFAIR colleagues for putting the session together. Thank you very much as well to Peter and Rudolf for being guest speakers. I think it's always nice to hear from some of the repositories that actually went through the whole support program, and not just from the people that organized everything, to actually get a bit of feeling for how useful that has been. I don't know if there are any questions. I don't see anything in the Q&A. I think the discussion in the chat has definitely continued, so I will catch up with that. Thank you for the colleagues to post all the links there. And we'll check with the organizers to make sure that the slides will be available afterwards. And yeah, if you want to hear about any of the work from FAIRsFAIR once it comes out, give us a follow on Twitter or on the webpage. You can also sign up for a newsletter, and that's kind of the easiest way to make sure you get all the news into your inbox. So thank you everyone for your time and the compliments I can see in the chat, and have a good day and enjoy the rest of Open Repositories.